Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and thank you so very much for joining me this evening. And wherever you are, I want to send you loads of love, and I do hope that you're all doing incredibly well. Thank you so much for your continuous support of my channel. Let's get started with tonight's story, but if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Let's get started. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. My name is Hector, and I'm initially from San Diego. My father is Canadian, and my mother is from Philadelphia originally. My Bigfoot encounter happened in 1986, when I was 14 years old, in Alberta, in Canada. I grew up in a rather squalid and run-down high-rise apartment block in downtown San Diego, a single child with two really dreadful parents. I do not say that lightly, because I don't wish to be unkind about the two people that raised me in the very early part of my life. You see, my father was a very quiet, unassuming man who never said a single word, and he was ruled by an iron rod by my hot-headed mother. My mother was a monster. I knew of no other word to describe her. Every word that came out of her mouth was vile, vulgar, and obscene. And every time she spoke, it would be a swear word or she would curse everything and everyone, and invariably find herself caught up in all kinds of neighbourhood disputes and squabbles. It was not uncommon to find my mother having a huge barmy or fight with another woman, which would invariably always involve physical altercations that meant pulling of hair and heavy punching, bloody noses, and sometimes broken parts of the body like wrists and ankles. It was never ending. I was one of my mother's best punching bags, and whenever she was mad at me, or with anybody in the world, I was the one that was the target of all this beating. She would beat me black and blue with a huge leather belt, and my father would just sit back watching without saying a word. Looking back, I think he was afraid of my bullying mother, but never once did he ever intervene on my behalf or stick up for me. It did not help that my parents were very poor and money was hard to come by. Much of it was spent on weed, which my parents loved to smoke. They would while away the long monotonous hours in a stoned state. Sometimes at the grand age of 14, I truly felt like the only adult in our home. I hate to tell you that I didn't love my parents, but resented and despised them. In hindsight, being that much older, I don't have that same amount of animosity towards them, and I choose to forgive them, because I don't want to give them the satisfaction of living my life with bitterness and hatred towards them. My mother had always told me that I was the biggest inconvenience in her life, and she wished I'd never been born. You have no idea how that shatters your confidence and self-esteem as a child growing up. It certainly did for me. One day I decided enough was enough and I was going to run away. And that was the day, armed with my meagre savings in a small suitcase, I boarded a Greyhound bus that was heading towards Vancouver. I was surprised that nobody asked me any awkward questions. But if anyone was going to ask me anything, I was going to tell them that I was visiting an aunt of mine in Canada. Luckily, I did even have an envelope with her address on it, because I really did have an aunt who was living there. I was lucky that I was a tall kid and looked very much older than my 14 years of age. I still remember sitting on that bus, which was a long 21-hour journey to Vancouver, and as we drove further and further away from San Diego, I could feel a sense of huge relief wash over my body, like a gentle, refreshing rain shower. I had no idea what I was going to do once I got to Vancouver. But you know what? I didn't really care. Sleeping in a cardboard box on a street corner was infinitely more preferable than living in a high-rise apartment block with my abusive mother and my dead quiet father. I was sitting next to a very nice gentleman on the bus who told me that he was being picked up by his brother in Vancouver, who would be driving all the way to Alberta. I wasted no time in asking this gentleman for a ride. I didn't even know where Alberta was, but I figured if it was good enough for him, it was good enough for me. So I lied and I told him my aunt lived there, and he eagerly accepted my request, saying that it would be a pleasure to give me a lift. Fast forward a couple of days and I'd been living rough in the Alberta countryside for a couple of days. I'd been sleeping under the stars in a beautiful clearing in the open wilderness and had infinitely more fun than I'd had in the first 14 years of my life in that high-rise apartment block with my parents. I had run out of money. Nothing was left in the world for me, when quite suddenly a woman approached me, just out of the blue like that. She was in her 60s with a smooth white skin, grey curly hair, and bright blue twinkling eyes that were so full of life and mischief. "I can smell a runaway a mile off," she said, looking at me curiously. My mouth dropped open. How did she know, I wondered? Was it that obvious? Was she going to tell the police about me? "Come with me," she said. "You look like you could do with a good meal inside you, and a decent wash wouldn't hurt either." The lady took me to her cabin in the Alberta countryside that was a little shabby, but it was cosier and more welcoming than anything I'd ever known. Her topsy-turvy home was literally in the most remote area in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by exquisite mountainous valleys, wooded areas, beautiful lakes, and endless rambling wilderness that literally stretched back for miles on end. Fast forward a few weeks, and I have to tell you, the most extraordinary thing happened. I was now living in Alberta, Canada, with this lovely woman that I had encountered the very day that my money ran out. Talk about good luck. She had become my guardian angel if ever I did see one. She was a remarkable, kind woman with a heart of gold, and her name was Sophia. I had told her my entire story about my abusive parents, and she was so determined to never, 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 never let me go back to that horrible San Diego apartment. "I will not have you going back to that dingy life with those dreadful abusive parents of yours," she said to me. "You deserve so much better than that." What if the police come looking for me? What if they retrace my footsteps? I mean, they'll have a record of my presence on that Greyhound bus, won't they? I said. "There are always ways and means of never being found," she said. "From now on, you're my nephew, who has come to live with me, and we'll call you Carl if anybody asks." But you know what? Nobody ever did. "If you're sure," I said. "I mean, I don't want to impose." "Absolutely not," she said. "It'll be good having your young blood around the place, and you're not imposing at all. Not at all. Do you understand?" I nodded. For the first time in my young life, someone had shown me compassion and love, and tears of relief and joy poured down my face. I was to discover that Sophia had also attempted to run away from home several times, but had been dragged back kicking and screaming by the police when she was a young girl. Her parents had both been alcoholics, so I'd seemed to have found a kindred spirit who really understood my plight. From that day on, Sophia became like a real mother to me, like the mother I never had. Sophia actually dyed my blonde hair black, just in case I had been registered as a missing person, and the police came around asking awkward questions, but I'm glad to say that that never happened. Maybe my mother had never reported me missing, but was probably so thrilled to see the back of me. I guess I'll never know. Sophia had been a teacher in her younger days, so she did an amazing job in homeschooling me. In my spare time, I would always frequent the woods on her land. The woods were full of beautiful aspen trees, oaks, maples, and spruce, and they were exceedingly gorgeous, teeming with an abundance of wildlife. There was also a stunning, shimmering silver lake on the left-hand side of the valley, where I would sit for ages, hiding behind a huge rocky outcrop, and it was there that I would watch the deer congregate as they came to drink. I had seen a lynx drinking there once before, and several times I had seen elk, bison, and even the occasional black bear, and even on the odd occasion a grizzly from time to time. One day, as I was hiding behind the rocky outcrop with my binoculars pinned on the lake, something that I just loved to do, I saw the most majestic fish eagle hovering over the water like a low-flying hovercraft, and then diving down to retrieve a huge fish. I was passionate about eagles. I watched in awe as my binoculars focused on this incredible bird, tearing off the fleshy flesh from its bones and tucking into the soft meat. Suddenly I noticed that everything around the lake had retreated. Some of the elk that had been there for a while and had been drinking the water suddenly scattered away as if something had frightened them. And a little while later a black bear that had gathered there seemed to be smelling the area with his nose and didn't appear to like what he was smelling. And then he also ran away, only too eager to make a hasty escape. Everything suddenly went deathly quiet around the lake, and I'd never seen the place become that still before. It would seem that even the cheerful bird song had all but retreated, and there was a slight breeze that appeared to have dissipated all of a sudden. All I could see was the large fish eagle, who was still perching on the branch of an elm tree, looking towards the trees as if he was waiting for something or someone to appear, but I could not imagine what or who. I did wonder what was going on, and that was when I saw him, a creature that has never graced the cover of science books ever before. Well, not the ones that I've ever read. It was formidable, it was majestic, powerful, and equally as imposing as a lion and as huge as a rhino. It was a cross between a great ape and a human, and it was utterly and totally flawless and magnificent. I was awestruck by this creature and paralysed by it, but not by fear, but rather by sheer shock and horror at what I was actually seeing. I almost had to pinch myself to assure myself that I was indeed seeing this creature, and that this was not a dream. The creature was swinging its arms as it walked, and it was so graceful and majestic and agile in its movements. I noticed under its arms he appeared to be carrying something that looked like a scroll, something rolled up. Maybe it was an elk skin. What on earth was this creature, I did wonder. The creature was covered from head to toe with long human-like red-brown hair that seemed to shimmer in the sun like really healthy hair tends to do. I'm assuming the creature was male because of his monstrous size. He stood at about 9 feet tall and weighed at the very least 900 pounds. His torso was utterly massive, and his long arms that fell below the knees positively rippled with muscle. In human terminology, we would describe the creature as being absolutely ripped. But for a man to look like this, he would have to pump himself with hundreds of artificial steroids to achieve such muscular gains. I would describe this creature as a bipedal gymnast, bodybuilder, and acrobat all rolled into one. He was strong, athletic, agile, flexible, coordinated, and exceedingly powerful. His head was beautifully cone-shaped, and with the binoculars I made out a long, pink-like, hairless face, a very large flat nose, prominent brow ridge, and deep-set brown eyes. Suddenly the creature made a whistling sound that even I could hear from the other side of the lake. It was very shrill. I watched the fish eagle responding to that whistle almost immediately by flying towards the hairy humanoid and perching on his outstretched forearm. I sensed that the eagle had a relationship with the hairy man and appeared so comfortable and familiar with the creature, almost as if they were friends. He then bounced from the hairy man's forearms to his shoulders, where he perched indefinitely. I watched in total amazement as the large hairy humanoid waded through the shallower parts of the lake, with the eagle perched on his shoulders. As he did this, the fish eagle was surveying the water with his beady, predatory eyes, looking for any movement that came from beneath. And then suddenly he saw a fish in the water, and he would dart off the humanoid's shoulders and just rush into the water to retrieve a fish, never ever missing. He was that good. The hairy man took out the rolled elk skin from under his arm and placed the fish into it. Every time one was caught, he would unroll the elk skin, and then he would twist it up like a bag. The fish eagle used the hairy creature's shoulders like a portable moving branch, and it seemed that they both benefited from this incredibly successful fishing arrangement that they had together. Before long, the two of them literally shared all the fish that was in the bag. The big hairy giant sat on the side of the lake, with the eagle still perched on his shoulder. He handed the eagle a fish, who started tucking into it greedily. He was now using the humanoid ape's massive shoulders like a huge tree branch, and he kept his fish in his large talons while tucking into the juicy meat. I also watched the hairy ape-like creature diving into the fish with equal gusto. He was really enjoying the meal. Once he had finished his fill, I noticed that he smacked his lips and then rolled up the elk skin tightly like a bag. I think there must have been only 1.5 fish left inside. I watched the eagle flying away. It soared into the sky majestically, and then it was gone. It was breathtakingly beautiful to watch. What an amazing bird. The hairy humanoid sat by the lake for a long while, looking reflective, almost as if he was thinking about the things he had to do, or what he was planning to eat later on. I don't know, but he looked deep in thought. He then began to throw pebbles in the water, and I watched where they landed. He was watching also, and it became a game for him that he seemed to appear to be enjoying very much. After a while, the hairy humanoid left the lake, disappearing into the woods, and I have to say, I did feel very disappointed. I had so enjoyed watching him. He was so majestic and such a powerful creature, and this had been totally the most wonderful, unexpected experience of my life, something that I was truly privileged to see. I could not wait to tell Sophia about my incredible encounter. I was just about to go when I saw something peeking at me over the rocky outcrop where I'd been hiding. It was the face of the hairy humanoid that I had just only seen moments before. He looked at me with seemingly amused brown eyes, and I did not detect an ounce of malice or hostility from the creature. Our eyes did meet for a moment, and the creature held my gaze ever so briefly, and then he walked away. And I really got the sense he was saying, "Do not think I didn't see you watching me over there with the eagle. I knew you were there all along." When I told Sophia about my encounter, she told me that she'd seen the creature before herself. One time she'd owned a dog called Paddy, a black Scottish terrier. She told me that she couldn't find him anywhere and became incredibly frantic and kept calling out for him, but she got no answer. Finally, she heard some terrified yelps, and she ran out to see that her dog was being attacked by a lone wolf, who was trying to lunge into her dog's flesh. Suddenly she heard a monstrous roar, and then she saw the humanoid ape lunging towards the wolf, who became terrified and tried to escape. But the humanoid grabbed the wolf and killed it instantly, throwing it violently against a rocky stone. And then its head just broke apart, almost like an egg. And then little Paddy came running towards me, she told me, into my arms. And the hairy humanoid just looked at me with these gentle brown eyes, threw the wolf over its shoulders like a sack of potatoes, and retreated into the woods. I truly believed he helped me. Yes, he got himself a good meal as well out of it, but he definitely saved Paddy's life, and I think he deliberately intervened on my behalf. I was to discover that over the years there were people in Alberta who had seen sightings of creatures like this. Some accounts were positive, and some people had experienced terrifying encounters with the mythical creature, so not everyone had a happy tale to tell. It was only in the year 2009, I was married by then with a beautiful wife and 2 lovely children living in Alberta, and one day we were all watching a program about Bigfoots, and that was when I was able to put the name to the hairy humanoid that I had seen between the ages of 14 and 15, when I was living with Sophia in her cabin on that remote and wild large area of land in Alberta. I now knew the creature I had seen was a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, or a Yeti. Sadly, my beautiful friend, mother, guardian angel, Sophia, whom I loved with every fragment of my being, died in 2003, and she is so sorely missed. She quite literally changed my life all those long years ago, and saved me from 2 parents who potentially could have seriously damaged me emotionally if I had stayed with them for very much longer. I always admired that courageous, plucky little 14-year-old boy that had the confidence to run away. I would like to tell all your listeners that some people who are missing do so intentionally, because believe me, that not everything that goes on behind closed doors is as straightforward as you may think it is. I know that better than most. As for my parents, I do not know what became of them, and as callous and as cold as it may sound, I don't really care either, although I do forgive them for the way they treated me all those years ago, because I don't want to hold any bitterness in my heart. So that is my story. Well, I just want to say thank you so very much for that incredible story. Wow, to have the courage to get on a Greyhound bus at the age of 14 years old and go to a place like Alberta in Canada and you just know no one, and to have been able to recreate a new life for yourself is utterly extraordinary. And I just absolutely adored your tale of the Bigfoot's interaction with the incredible eagle. I mean, what a story. Absolutely amazing. Until next time, goodbye and good night.